InnerQuest explores various pathways through which you can connect with the infinite wisdom of the universe and apply it to personal, professional, and spiritual growth. This program, featuring accomplished practitioners, educators, and authors, is provided by Infinity Foundation, an innovative center for holistic studies and research. We invite you to share this journey with us.
Hello, welcome to InnerQuest. My name is Jay Stone, your host for today, and our guest is Dave Birr. Welcome, Dave.
Thank you, Jay.
Let me tell the audience a little bit about you. Dave has facilitated soul growth groups for 45 years. He has taught courses on intuition, dreams, soul development, forgiveness, esoteric, psychology, meditation, astrology, relationships, numerology, enneagram, healing, reincarnation, and karma. Whew. You've been a busy guy.
I have been busy. I started early, when I was about 14, 15 years old.
And what's interesting is we were talking before the show, and I found out you've got an engineering background. You want to say a few words about that?
Well, that's true. I spent 8 years in engineering school at Northwestern University studying industrial engineering, but my main interest in those studies were energy and environmental policy, and it's a field I continue to work in today with my own company, which I've had for over 30 years.
Yeah, and it sounds like you're doing a lot of good for the environment by reducing the energy usage.
Well, that's true. I've literally been involved in billions of dollars of energy efficiency and alternative renewable energy projects throughout the United States.
Great. All right, and I just want to add that Dave has drawn inspiration from Edgar Cayce, A Course of Miracles, Alice Bailey, David Spangler, Rudolf Steiner, and you forgot to mention your wife.
That's true.
Susan
My wife, Susan Weishart, as well.
Yeah.
Also very inspiring.
Yeah, a long-time Infinity teacher and a guest several times on the show. All right. So first question is, how are past lives and astrology related?
Well, that's a good question, because a lot of people, when they look at an astrology chart, they think you can automatically tell about past lives. And my take on it is a little bit different. My take is that your past lives are sort of one part of your soul history, but another part of your soul history relates to what I would call planetary sojourns. Between the times when you're incarnated in a body in the earth, your consciousness is in other dimensions that are associated with the qualities of the planets, or the planetary dimensions of consciousness is what I would call them. And so you have a piece of your soul history that comes from that experience, and that's complementary, and it's connected to your incarnational experience during your past lives in the earth plane. But there are definitely differences between them, although they're linked and related to each other.
Well, I'm going to see if I got this correct. So typically when you go to an astrologer, you give them your birth date,
yes,
your birthplace, your birth time, and they chart the planets.
Correct.
And so what you're saying is that time prior to the incarnation of the body influences the soul's journey?
Well, it's more like what I would say is that your astrology chart is like a snapshot, and it shows you the momentum of the choices you've made, but the choices that it's showing you are choices you've made as a soul in other dimensions of consciousness. And because of the time that you spend in those other dimensions of consciousness, they have an influence on what you're thinking and your mental and your spiritual qualities of being. So, for example, if you spend a lot of time in Mercury, you might be very intelligent, very focused in your mind.
Now, does that happen to be where Mercury was in the chart, or somebody just is more intellectual, more uses their mind more than anything else?
You can get a clue about whether someone is influenced a great deal by Mercury by how Mercury appears in their chart, where it's positioned and how it's influenced.
Okay.
Yes, and it would be the same for other planets as well.
Okay.
Someone else might have a much more Venusian consciousness or awareness, where they're much more focused on love and affection and the arts and beauty, and that's much more in their makeup and in their being, and you'll see that to some extent through their chart.
And so what planets have influenced you and your journey?
Well, that's a good question. I'd say if you were to look at my chart in the way that I look at it, to look at soul history, I would say Saturn and Neptune are very prominent.
And why would you say that?
Well, for one is because of where they are in the chart, they appear at a particular angle and they influence a lot of other things in the chart. And because of that, Saturn inclines people to be more scientific. It inclines people to be more interested in logic and systematic thinking.
Hence your industrial engineering.
Hence engineering and
Yeah.
science.
Yeah.
But also Neptune inclines people to be spiritual. It inclines people to be interested in the mysterious, in the hidden forces. It tends to make people into mystics. And people always ask me, they're always shocked when they find out, you know, you're an engineer and you have this engineering company. Why are you doing all these mystical things which you've done for 40 years? You're teaching and training all these courses. And I said, well, before I was ever an engineer, I was a mystic. Because when I was in high school, I was remembering my past lives. I was getting up at 2 a.m. in the morning to meditate for an hour, and I was doing yoga. So that all was there before I went to
Did you
engineering
grow up in the
school.
60s by any chance?
I did grow up in the 60s. How did you know?
Well, it was a time of great experimentation.
It was.
In many ways, not
Yes.
rock and roll,
True.
drugs, sex, and of course seeking ways to advance the consciousness.
Exactly.
Yeah, so why did you study that in college? It was just you were just so drawn to engineering.
Well, there is another planet in my chart which makes you more technical, and that is Mars, which is related to fire and energy. And anything having to do with fire, well, energy, which I work in the energy field, is related to fire because Mars rules fire. So if Mars is very prominent, you see people going into engineering often. And that's
Yeah.
also a significant planet in my chart.
And this may sound unusual to Americans that an engineer is interested in astrology, but I've met physicians, medical doctors from India who it's typical they do medical astrology.
Yeah, in fact, they believe you can't properly practice medicine in India if you don't have an astrology background because their sciences are more interrelated and linked than ours are. And for that matter, if you ever go to an astrology convention, which I've spoken at a number of astrology conventions, you'd be shocked at how many engineers you run into. People say, well, why are all these engineers studying astrology? Well, partly they love the math.
All right. Ed, what does an astrology chart reveal about the history of a soul?
Well, I believe it gives you a picture of the relative emphasis in consciousness based on your past planetary experiences in consciousness as a soul. And they're complementary to your past lives. So the past lives might have more of an influence on your emotional body, on your personality makeup, on how you feel about things emotionally and how you respond emotionally. But how you respond, which ideas and which mental and spiritual philosophies resonate with you more might be shown better by your planetary sojourns or experiences in those other dimensions.
And you've taught many classes with your wife, Susan Weishart.
That is true.
And are you teaching this in your classes?
Yes, we have spoken. We did a nice sort of complimentary presentation last year up in Milwaukee for the Association for Research and Enlightenment, where she covered past lives and the karmic influences from past lives, and I covered planetary sojourns and the influences from the astrological chart would show about your past planetary sojourn consciousness.
So it sounds like you and your wife, you're going for the same thing, but from...
We're showing different parts of the soul history that are complementary, and they are related.
Yeah.
So the way you live your life and the choices you make in this life influence where your consciousness will go next in terms of your soul growth. So if you need to develop a certain quality based on the consciousness of the life that you led in this incarnation, you will actually go to a particular dimension of consciousness symbolized by the planets in your next in between lifetimes.
Have you ever done a reading where a person has been transformed by it or enlightened?
You mean an astrology reading specifically?
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, it transformed in terms of their...
Like going a new direction.
Yeah. Well, I'll just give you one example.
Okay. That's what I was looking for.
One example would be someone who came to me who had a very difficult relationship history. And there were reasons why that their chart showed that. And they were feeling sort of forlorn about it. And they said, well, what can I expect in terms of a future relationship? And, they were interested in timing because they just had a live-in relationship for an extended period of time that it ended in a difficult way. And I looked at their chart, and they had an unusual coincidence of trends coming together because the influences from astrology sort of cycle back over time, forces that you've set in motion, and then you can see when the next wave is coming ahead of time. And I said, in about 3 years, I think you're going to get married. And she said, oh, well, she wasn't dating anyone. She'd just come out of a bad relationship. Well, didn't think much about it. But a few years later, she came back to me with her fiance in tow and said they'd planned a wedding. And the date they'd planned it for was 3 years from when I'd given her that reading, roughly, within a week or two.
Wow.
So they're now happily married, have a couple children. So that's an example, I guess.
That's a great example. Can you explain to our audience what you mean by karma?
Yeah, a good way to think about karma, it's like a habit. When you take a repeated action and build a habit, that's really how you create karma. You create a memory of how you respond to various stimulus. It's a habit of making a certain choice. And the more times you make that choice, the more it's reinforced. The only thing that makes it karma is the fact that it goes between lifetimes. You do the same thing in this lifetime. You build up a habit. It's just within a single lifetime. But we also build up habits that are multi-incarnational. So a habit that you had in a past life, you may carry that same pattern of stimulus and response into this life.
And do you think there's such a thing as good karma, bad karma?
Absolutely. I mean, in terms of how you feel about it, sure. I mean, you can have karma. I'll just give you a really trivial example. When I was in high school, my idea of a good time was to go to the library on the weekend and read a lot of books. My parents thought I was a little crazy. They were worried about me. What's wrong with a kid? He loves studying stuff. School's not enough for him. He's got to go on the weekends and study. But I had some past lives where I spent lives as a scholar studying and researching things. So it was very natural to me. It was a joy to read, and study and learn.
And how many past lives are you aware that you've had?
That's a good question because some lives I have a much more detailed perspective on what happened and where and when and so on. In other places, it's more like little pieces of a memory. But I never have sat down and tried to add them up particularly. I didn't get that quantitative, but many in the sense that I'm aware of a number of lives in different locales and different time periods.
And are you still trying to learn from your past lives that you've had?
Yes. What you find oftentimes is that a particular memory emerges when it's relevant in your life now. You can think of the life that you're living now in some ways connects back to. People say, well, a lot of times you hear people say, well, why should I bother learning about it? It's in the past. And I say, well, if you value freedom, you should value awareness, because what you're not aware of will unconsciously control you. And if you're responding out of an unconscious habit, it'll drive your behavior often in ways that aren't constructive in this lifetime. You may repeat the same unhealthy habits or patterns that you had in the past. But if you become aware of them, you can transform them and grow into something that's a more healthy expression. The same thing is true of an astrology chart. When you look at it and you see a pattern that is potentially challenging, you can transform the energies of how they come into expression through using your will to create a more constructive expression of those energies.
Can you give a concrete example of that?
Sure. For example, if you know that you had you want an astrology example or a past life example?
Either or both.
All right. Let's take one from astrology. Suppose you have a square between the planets Saturn and Mercury. Normally, a square is considered to be the most unconscious aspect because a square is where the forces are going at 90 degrees. It's like your visual field. If I'm looking across like this, I can see the person in front of me, but a square is often a 90-degree angle. I don't see that. I'm unconscious of what that factor is, but it's influencing me. So when you put a couple principles of energy together like that, there's a natural tension because of the unconsciousness. In my case, the planets Saturn and Mercury are in a square. So people would say, oh, well, that can influence your communications in a way that makes you not able to communicate so effectively because Mercury is related to communication and Saturn is a restrictive, constricting influence. But the other thing that Saturn can do is it's also a concentrating influence. So instead of it being a restriction on communication, it can also concentrate your thinking and your expression, so you're very focused like a laser. And you can go very deep into a subject and become really a scholar or a student and make your mind very profound. So that would be an example of taking it in a more constructive direction.
Okay, and you have done that. Why are karmic influences important to us?
Well, because if you want to grow, you want to deal with karmic memories that may be limiting your soul growth or your soul expression. And to the extent that you react out of unconscious habits which limit soul expression, that's really why you want to undo or release karmic patterns that are inhibiting your soul from fully expressing itself.
Have you ever met anybody who has changed their karma?
Oh, sure, many people.
Can you give some examples?
Yeah, let me try and give you a specific example of overcoming a karmic pattern. I mean, my wife, I'll just mention Susan Weishart, is a past life regression therapist, and she's worked with literally thousands of clients.
And she's a licensed professional counselor.
She is a licensed marriage and family therapist and
Okay.
a nationally certified school psychologist. She's got many credentials.
Yeah.
But she's worked with thousands of people literally on, transforming their lives through, undoing karmic patterns that were limiting them in some ways. I mean, I'm aware of many examples from her practice that she's presented, but I'm trying to think of one I could give you that's more personal and relevant to a karmic pattern transformation.
Well, is something like meditation, would that help undo a karmic
Absolutely.
pattern?
Yeah, it does in a number of ways, because in meditation, you begin to transform your own awareness. A lot of it is shifting your sense of identity. If you think of yourself at a minimum, you're a personality and a soul. And a lot of what's in a book that I helped Susan write called Soul Visioning.
Here, I can hold this up for the audience. And I see Dr. Brian Weiss has actually endorsed the book front
He did,
cover.
very kindly. Yeah.
Yeah.
But in that book, we talk quite a bit about integrating the soul and personality. And a lot of us, if you think about how the personality develops, you have all your karmic habits from the past, then you'll have all your conditioning from this lifetime, your family, your early childhood, your school
And
experiences.
genetics has got to play a role in
Your
it.
genetics, everything is all in the mix, and there's that personality level. But we all know that's not our permanent identity, because that's only for this incarnation. Mm-hmm. We also have an identity that transcends this single incarnation, which is the soul, which is a much broader, a much vaster sense of identity. And when you're undoing karmic limitations, you're helping allow the soul come into more full expression of its true nature, you might say. And the soul wants to express love, it wants to express light, it wants to be free, and we have often restricted ourselves through fear in so many ways. And a lot of undoing karmic memories is really releasing from fear. That's what's profoundly healing.
And where does the fear come from? Why,
Well,
why have we lost touch of our soul, that the part of us that never dies?
Well, you can think of it that everyone has post-traumatic stress disorder from their past lives, because we've
Okay.
all had fearful experiences. I'll just give you one from my own experience. So in Egypt, at one point in time, I had a past life where I happened to be in the priesthood, and I made the mistake of learning about some things that were politically inconvenient for people who were in power. They would prefer that I not know. And I was assassinated. I was actually stabbed, and I died. And I sort of, as a reaction to that experience, I took the lesson from that, a fearful lesson, which is if you know too much, it can get you in trouble. Mm-hmm. In fact, it can get you killed. Mm-hmm. And so in my next incarnation, I took a much more humble, don't look at me. I came back in a lifetime in Greece where I was in a much less responsible position without any possibility of anyone really caring what I knew or didn't know. And so that was a reaction to it. The problem is it was driven by fear. So that's not really the lesson you want to learn.
Well, sometimes when people have something happen in a past life, they might have a physical injury.
That
in
happens
this,
too.
Yeah, in this lifetime. Or they may have a fear, like a fear of knives or fear.
Sure.
Did you carry any of those fears?
I wouldn't say
besides the fear of gaining too much knowledge?
Yeah, I wouldn't say a fear of knives specifically, but maybe in terms of the fear of...
Or mistrust.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could say maybe not having the strongest trust in authority figures. Now, which is ironic given that most of my clients are government agencies that I work for. But the interesting thing about that is that a lot of time I spend fighting for environmental regulations with people who are breaking the law, like potentially suing a company that's breaking the Clean Air Act, or being involved with people who are polluting the water and taking them to court and being an expert witness testifying against them. So in that respect, sort of a crusader for truth, you might say.
Or justice.
Or justice.
And protecting the environment, which we all need to survive.
This is true.
Yeah.
So that some people call that a reaction formation. So you're fearful about the harm that's being done, but instead of running away from it, you decide to stand and fight.
Right.
And, try to protect it.
Okay. Reaction formation is a psychological defense.
It is.
All right. So what is the connection between grace and karma?
Well, that's a really important question, because a lot of times people have an idea about karma and they're very fatalistic. They say, well, what happened to free will? It's just everything I choose now has created this, and now I'm trapped by my karma and I can't get out of it. And it's very limiting conception. And I point out that you can change your consciousness, you can change your awareness. And karma comes from you succumbing to memory, succumbing to habit and reacting the same way to a similar experience. But what if you choose an alternative response that's aligned with your spiritual purpose and your soul? What if you choose a different response and you choose one that's a more ideal expression of your values? That choice is liberating because it frees you from karma. How do you make that shift? Often forgiveness is involved, where you let go of the habit of responding in a fearful way and you choose a more loving response, and you substitute that and you build a new pattern of response. And that really is what frees you. That's, in a sense, I really equate grace very closely with forgiveness, because you're letting go of a fearful response and you're electing a loving response as an alternative.
Well, my friend, she doesn't talk about God, she talks about grace. And so she would equate grace with God. She feels like the religion she brought up was too male dominant and dominated, and she wasn't allowed to be the woman that she wanted to be, that she was born to be. So she just uses the word grace. So but you have an interesting take on it. And then you mentioned forgiveness. And so why is forgiveness one of the keys to healing?
Well, I'm going to do something where you take the word apart a little bit.
Okay.
Love is giving from the soul level. And if you think about forgiveness and you substitute in the word, my definition of love is giving from the soul perspective.
You're using a mathematical equation?
I'm using a mathematical equation.
Okay.
Then forgiveness is for loving.
Yeah.
That's what you're choosing. You're choosing to love from a soul level when you engage in forgiveness.
And usually when somebody doesn't want to forgive, they want to take, not to give.
Well, they usually, if you don't want to forgive, it relates to wanting to hold on to a memory or a pattern to justify yourself, to see yourself as having been unfairly treated and wanting to retain the memory of that injustice and hold on to it. The ironic thing is it actually harms your soul growth and it harms the soul growth of the person you hold the grudge against. It doesn't really help either one of you.
Well, and it's also toxic.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's, I've heard of type A behavior.
Yes.
Well, there's a type C behavior where people are more prone to getting cancer. And one of the main characteristics of somebody more prone to get cancer is resentment.
Absolutely.
And if you look at the word resentment, it keeps resending those angry thoughts around, which impairs the immune system, which makes us vulnerable to disease.
It makes perfect sense. I like the way you took that word apart and showed how it resends the same message to you over and over again.
The self-destructive message, yeah. So how has your life changed through forgiveness?
That's a good question. I mean, sometimes I've had to work with clients who are somewhat challenging, and what I found is if I can change the way I view them, so instead of seeing them as somehow seeing their behavior or interpreting it as negatively, I see that they're really they're trying to do the best they can under the circumstances, and what they need is someone who can respond to them with patience and perseverance and understand them and skillfully respond to them in a way that really meets their genuine needs. And you know, even if I feel that sometimes they haven't always made the best choices, I could still work with them. And in many cases, I've been able to work with clients that other, I'll say, consultants in my industry chose not to work with, and been able to get really...
Because they're too difficult.
Yeah, because they basically told me they couldn't work with them. And I've been able to transform those relationships into very productive, long-term relationships where we achieved a lot of good work.
Now, you mentioned that you started meditating in high school. Do you continue to meditate today?
Every day.
Yeah. And can you talk a little about your personal meditation practice and how it helps you with business and with relationships?
Sure. No, I mean, I'll give you some examples there. When I was in college, I was, of course, brought my meditation practice from high school, and I was sailing through college. I had much more emotional equilibrium as I meditated, just much more at peace. Also, I found that my problem-solving ability went through the roof in terms of just ability to do academic problems, mathematics and things like that. My brain functioned much more efficiently. Now, I did a little experiment in college, not intentionally, but unintentionally. I took 6 months off of meditating, the longest interval I ever had where I didn't meditate. I had more difficulties in 6 months than I had in my whole life up to that point in time. More issues in relationships.
Was that intentional or just...
It was unconsciousness. I went unconscious for about 6 months, stopped meditating, got focused on other things, then I had all sorts of difficulties. You know, I won't want to exaggerate, they weren't life-altering, but they were challenging. And I suddenly stepped back one day and I said, what's happening here? What's going on? And I realized I'm not meditating.
Yeah.
I went back to meditating. I haven't stopped since.
That's great. And well, I'm guessing about 40 years.
That I've been meditating?
Yeah.
A little longer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let's see, we got about a minute left.
Sure.
So say what you want in this final minute.
All right, I want to talk a little bit about dimensions of consciousness. Edgar Cayce made an interesting comment. He said the 3 dimensions of consciousness in the earth are time, space, and patience. And that's how you make sense of your experience here. People said, patience, how is patience a dimension of consciousness?
Yeah.
Because patience is a measure of your understanding of the spiritual purpose of your experience. So when you don't understand the spiritual purpose of your experience, what do you say? You say, I don't get it, I'm impatient, I don't understand what's happening to me or why it's happening. But if you have great patience, you have great spiritual understanding of what's happening to you in your experience.
Well, and that's like to embrace the moment.
Exactly.
You know, it is what it is. The universe is perfect. And
Yes.
the reason, it just is.
Live in the present moment and understand the purpose of the experience you're having and how you contributed to creating it.
All right. Well, we're going to have to wrap it up.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
For more information about InnerQuest, Infinity Foundation, David Birr, stay tuned to the credits at the end. Until next time, wish you good health, good fortune, and good spirits. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
For more information about this show, our guest, Infinity Foundation, or any of our other programs, please visit our website, infinityfoundation.com.